The green-blue shimmer of Earth filled the view screen of Alpha, one orbital station, as Dr. Elise Wren adjusted the parameters of the long-range detection system. Beyond the curved edge of the planet, stars glittered in the void, each one a potential candidate for her research on interstellar anomalies. In the year 2091, humanity had finally begun to heal the wounds inflicted by the climate crisis. The unified Earth Alliance governed a planet that had narrowly escaped self-destruction, and space exploration had accelerated as resources once dedicated to survival were redirected toward the stars. Anything interesting today? Lieutenant Sora Lynn's voice broke the silence as she entered the observatory module, bringing Elise a steaming cup of synthetic coffee. The usual cosmic background radiation, Elise replied, accepting the cup with a grateful nod. Nothing extraordinary, just the universe being its mysterious self. At 42, Dr. Elise Wren had dedicated her life to searching for patterns in the cosmos that might indicate intelligent life. The irony wasn't lost on her that humanity had barely managed to save itself from extinction before turning its gaze outward again. Near-star travel had become technically feasible in the last decade, but so far, the probes sent to Alpha Centauri and Barnard Star had found no signs of life. Status report from Earth Command, Sora said, checking her wrist display. They want confirmation that the new quantum detection arrays are functioning within parameters. Elise sighed. Tell them everything is nominal. The arrays can detect gravitational anomalies at twice the range of the old system, but there's nothing out there causing any significant disturbances. The words had barely left her mouth when a small alert appeared in the corner of her screen. An anomaly in the tracking system. Elise frowned, leaning forward to examine the data more closely. That's odd, she murmured. What is it? Sora moved to her side, peering at the display. A gravitational distortion. Small, but definitely not background noise. Elise's fingers flew across the holographic interface, isolating the anomaly. It appeared suddenly about 8 million kilometers out. Wait, the single anomaly multiplied into 2, then 4, then dozens, spreading across her screen like a silent constellation of disturbances. This can't be right, Sora whispered, her voice tense. System malfunction? Run a diagnostic, Elise ordered, but the feeling in her stomach told her this wasn't a glitch. The pattern was too ordered, too deliberate. As the diagnostic began, more anomalies appeared, now hundreds, arranged in what appeared to be a spherical formation around Earth. When the first visual confirmation came through the long-range telescopes, Elise felt her breath catch in her throat. Against the blackness of space, massive objects had appeared, dark, angular shapes that absorbed rather than reflected light. They were positioned in a perfect spherical arrangement around Earth, maintaining fixed positions relative to one another. Contact Earth Alliance Command, Elise said, her voice steadier than she felt. Priority Alpha. We have a first contact scenario. The hours that followed were a blur of frantic communication and escalating tension. The objects, ships, everyone now assumed, maintained their positions. They didn't respond to radio signals, laser communications, or quantum entanglement messages. They simply hung in space, a silent armada surrounding humanity's home. As Earth's political and military leaders scrambled to formulate a response, Elise remained at her post, analyzing every scrap of data from the mysterious fleet. The ship's surfaces absorbed 99.8% of all electromagnetic radiation directed at them, making detailed observation nearly impossible. They emitted no detectable radiation themselves, no heat signatures, no communications, nothing but their overwhelming presence. 3 days after the arrival, Elise was recording observations when Alpha 1 station's systems began to malfunction. Communications with Earth became distorted, filled with static and strange harmonic patterns. What's happening? Sora's voice crackled through Elise's earpiece. The main power grid is fluctuating. Get to the backup systems, Elise replied, downloading as much data as she could to a secure drive. And her words were cut short as a high-pitched tone filled the station. Rising in intensity, until it became almost unbearable. Through the view screen, Elise saw a ripple of energy pass across the alien fleet, a subtle shift in the darkness of their hulls, as if they had all simultaneously changed state. Then a single, pure tone replaced the cacophony, and with it came a sensation Elise would later struggle to describe, a feeling of being observed, not just physically but mentally, as if something vast and ancient had turned its attention toward her consciousness. "Sora," she called, but received no answer. The lights flickered and died. In the emergency lighting, Elise made her way to the communications hub, where she found Sora unconscious at her station. The other crew members were similarly affected, slumped over consoles, or lying on the floor. With trembling hands, Elise activated the emergency beacon, transmitting a desperate message to Earth. "This is Dr. Elise Wren of Alpha 1. Unknown energy pulse from alien fleet. Station systems compromised. Crew incapacitated. I'm still conscious, but something is happening. They're not attacking, they're scanning us somehow. It's as if they're reading." The transmission cut off as another wave of energy washed through the station. In the sudden silence that followed, Elise heard a subtle, rhythmic pattern, not through the station systems, but seemingly inside her mind. A sequence of pulses, mathematical in nature, repeating with perfect precision. It was the last transmission from Alpha, one that anyone on Earth would receive. General Iver Malloch stood before the Earth Alliance Council, his weathered face set in grim lines as he outlined the military response to what was now being called the encirclement. "Our options are limited," he stated flatly. "We have no effective means of communication with these vessels, no understanding of their capabilities or intentions, and they have positioned themselves in a way that makes any coordinated defense nearly impossible." The council chamber, housed in the gleaming spire of the Alliance headquarters in New Geneva, was filled to capacity with representatives from every region of Earth. Screens displayed real-time imagery of the alien fleet, still motionless in its perfect formation around the planet. "What about Alpha?" asked Counselor Amaro Osei. "Have we re-established contact?" "Negative," Malloch replied. "The station is intact, but completely unresponsive. We've sent 2 rescue shuttles, but both lost power before reaching the station. Whatever field surrounds these ships also encompasses Alpha 1's orbit." "And Dr. Wren's final transmission?" Counselor Zhang inquired. "Partially recovered. Our analysts believe she was describing some sort of scanning process. Not physical, but perhaps targeting consciousness itself. It sounds fantastical, but we cannot dismiss the possibility." The chamber erupted in murmured conversations until Council Chair Rivera called for order. "General Malloch," she said, "what is your recommendation?" Malloch squared his shoulders. "Madam Chair, I recommend a focused electromagnetic pulse attack on the nearest vessel. Not as an act of aggression, but as a means to prompt a response, any response that might help us understand their intentions. And if that provokes a hostile reaction?" Counselor Osei challenged. "With respect, Counselor, their positioning already suggests hostile intent," Malloch countered. "They have surrounded our planet without warning or communication. If they wanted peaceful contact, they could have approached openly." Chair Rivera turned to the scientific advisor present. "Dr. Lin, your assessment?" Sora Lin had been recovered from Alpha 12 hours after Elise's transmission, found drifting in an escape pod with no memory of how she'd gotten there. She was the only survivor from the station, and the gap in her memory included not only her escape, but also the hours leading up to the energy pulse. "I cannot support General Malloch's recommendation," Sora said firmly. Dr. Wren's final transmission specifically noted that the aliens were not attacking, but scanning. Any aggressive action on our part could be catastrophic. "We don't know what scanning means in this context," Malloch argued. "For all we know, they could be preparing to wipe our minds or take control of our defense systems. Which is exactly why we should wait and observe," Sora countered. Dr. Wren was studying the signal patterns when communications failed. If we can recover and analyze that data, we might be able to establish communication. The debate continued for hours, with the military faction pushing for a preemptive strike and the scientific community advocating for patience and analysis. Meanwhile, reports began flooding in from around the world of strange phenomena. Objects moving without apparent cause, people experiencing identical dreams, and most disturbing, the systematic failure of unmanned satellites and probes throughout Earth's orbit. While the council deliberated, Sora returned to the temporary laboratory established for studying the alien fleet. She had been working around the clock, trying to piece together the fragmented data recovered from Alpha 1's partially functional systems. The rhythmic pattern Elise had mentioned in her final transmission was present in the background radiation now emanating from the fleet. A mathematical sequence that seemed to shift and evolve, becoming increasingly complex with each iteration. Sora stared at the visualization of the signal, watching as it formed intricate fractal patterns that reminded her of neural networks. Something about it triggered a memory, something Elise had theorized about years ago regarding the potential structure of non-human consciousness. It's not a language, Sora murmured to herself. It's a thought pattern. As she worked, the holographic display suddenly flickered, the pattern shifting dramatically before resolving into a new configuration, one that bore an uncanny resemblance to Earth's global communication network. They're not trying to talk to us, Sora realized with a chill. They're trying to understand how we talk to each other. The dreams began 3 days after the fleet's arrival. All across the world, people reported the same vision. Standing on an endless plain under an alien sky, filled with geometric shapes where stars should be. In the distance, a tower of light rose into the heavens, pulsing with the same rhythm that now permeated Earth's electromagnetic spectrum. Elise Wren experienced no such dreams. After the incident on Alpha 1, she had been found unconscious in the escape pod alongside Sora, but unlike her colleague, Elise had woken with her memory intact, and with something else. She could see the pattern now, not just in the data, but everywhere, in the arrangement of leaves on trees, in the flow of crowds through city streets, in the very air around her. It was as if a new layer of reality had been superimposed over the world, revealing connections that had always existed, but had remained invisible to human perception. The Earth Alliance had established a secure facility deep beneath New Geneva, where Elise now worked in isolation, her condition deemed too sensitive and potentially dangerous to allow for regular contact. General Mallock considered her compromised, possibly under alien influence. Only Sora was permitted regular access to her, bringing data and serving as the conduit between Elise and the Council. The pattern is evolving, Elise explained during one of Sora's visits. It's not just a message, it's a living structure, adapting to our observation of it. The walls of Elise's workspace were covered with equations and diagrams, attempting to map what she now called the consciousness lattice, a multidimensional framework that seemed to model how intelligence itself might be structured across different species and environments. The fleet isn't a collection of ships, Elise continued, her eyes feverishly bright. It's a unified organism, a distributed network of awareness. And it's trying to understand us by creating a compatible model of our consciousness. Sora studied her friend with concern. Elise had lost weight, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. The Council is losing patience, she said gently. General Mallock's faction is gaining support. People are frightened, Elise. The dreams, the anomalies, they're wearing down resistance to military action. We can't let that happen, Elise said urgently. I'm close to understanding the pattern. If we can replicate it, adapt it to our communication systems. The Council has given you 48 hours, Sora interrupted. After that, they're proceeding with Mallock's plan. Elise closed her eyes, a tremor passing through her thin frame. It won't work, she whispered. They won't respond to weapons. They don't think in terms of attack and defense. They're studying us like we would study an anthill, with curiosity, not malice. Then give me something to take back to the Council, Sora pleaded. Something concrete that can convince them to wait. Elise opened her eyes and pointed to a complex equation at the center of her diagrams. This is the key. The pattern isn't just a signal. It's a map of consciousness itself. And if I'm right, they're not invaders. They're cartographers of awareness. General Malloch stood on the observation deck of the Archangel, Earth's most advanced military vessel, watching his technicians prepare the electromagnetic pulse weapon for deployment. Despite the Council's reluctance, he had convinced them that a controlled demonstration of Earth's capabilities was necessary, not as an act of war, but as a statement of sovereignty. Targeting system locked on nearest vessel, reported the weapons officer. EMP at 70% charge. Malloch nodded, his expression grim. He had never wanted to be the man who initiated humanity's first interstellar conflict, but neither would he stand by while an unknown force held his planet hostage. Proceed with final charging sequence, he ordered. On the bridge screen, the target vessel hung in space, a dark, angular shape against the stars. Unlike conventional ships, it had no visible propulsion systems, no weapons ports, no communication arrays. Its surface was a perfect matte black that seemed to drink in light. "Sir," the communications officer called suddenly. "We're receiving an emergency transmission from Earth." "Command." Malloch frowned. "Put it through." The screen split to show Counselor Rivera's face, her expression urgent. "General, stand down immediately. Dr. Wren has made a breakthrough. The alien signal. It's not a weapon or a communication. It's a neural map." "Explain," Malloch demanded. "The aliens aren't preparing to attack," Rivera continued. "According to Dr. Wren, they're attempting to create a compatible model of human consciousness to facilitate understanding. Any aggressive action on our part will be interpreted as a fundamental aspect of our nature and incorporated into their model." Malloch's jaw tightened. "With respect, Counselor, that's speculation. We have no proof." "EMP at 90%, interrupted the weapons officer. "Stand down, General," Rivera ordered. "That's a direct command from the full council." For a moment, Malloch hesitated, torn between duty and instinct. Then, with a curt nod, he said, "Power down the EMP. Maintain position, but take no aggressive action." As the bridge crew complied, a strange sensation washed over the ship, a feeling of being observed with intense, almost microscopic attention. "Sir," the sensor officer called, voice rising in alarm, "we're detecting a massive energy buildup across the entire alien fleet." Malloch tensed. "Defensive systems online. Prepare for." The order was cut short as every system on the Archangel simultaneously shut down. Screens went dark, engines fell silent, and even the emergency lighting failed, plunging the bridge into absolute darkness. In that moment of perfect silence, Malloch felt something brush against his consciousness, a vast, cool intelligence that seemed to examine his thoughts with detached curiosity before withdrawing. When the systems came back online minutes later, the sensor readings told an impossible story. Every weapon in Earth's arsenal, from orbital platforms to ground-based missile systems, had been simultaneously deactivated. Not destroyed, but rendered temporarily inert, as if the knowledge of their function had been gently lifted from their operating systems. It was not an attack. It was a demonstration. And as Malloch stared at the readings in disbelief, the sky above Earth lit up with a brilliant aurora that encircled the entire planet, a shimmering curtain of light that pulsed with the same rhythm as the alien signal. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the alien vessels began to fade from sensor readings, not moving away, but seemingly phasing out of observable reality, leaving behind only the faintest electromagnetic echo. Within an hour, they were gone completely. The encirclement had ended without a word, without a battle, without explanation. Earth was alone again. 1 month after the disappearance of the alien fleet, Dr. Elise Wren stood before what remained of the Earth Alliance Council, her thin frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the chamber. "You must understand," she insisted, "the fleet was here. Hundreds of ships surrounded our planet for 7 days. They scanned our minds, neutralized our weapons, and then departed without explanation. These are facts." The council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Counselor Rivera cleared her throat gently. "Dr. Wren," she said, "we appreciate your dedication, but we found no evidence to support these claims. Our records show no unusual activity during the time frame you've specified. Because the records have been altered, Elise said desperately. Or erased, or something. I don't know how, but the memory of the event is gone. Not just from computers, but from people's minds. Doctor, General Mallock interjected, his expression a mixture of pity and suspicion. We've reviewed all satellite imagery, orbital sensor logs, and global communications from the past month. There is simply no evidence of any alien presence. Elise stared at him in disbelief. This was the man who had been prepared to fire upon the fleet, who had witnessed firsthand the deactivation of Earth's entire weapons network. Yet his eyes held no recognition, no memory of those events. General, you were there, she said quietly. On the Archangel, you saw them disable our weapons. You felt them in your mind. Mallock frowned. I've never served on a vessel called Archangel, Doctor, and I certainly haven't encountered any aliens. Elise turned to Sora, who sat silently at the side of the chamber. Sora, tell them. You were on Alpha. One with me. You helped me decode the pattern. Sora's expression was pained. Elise, I've worked with you for years, but I've never been stationed on Alpha 1. It was destroyed in a micrometeorite collision 2 years ago. There was no survival. The words hit Elise like a physical blow. Alpha 1 destroyed? That couldn't be right. She had been there just weeks ago, monitoring the stars when the fleet appeared. This is wrong, she whispered. All of this is wrong. How can none of you remember? Chair, Rivera signaled to the medical personnel waiting discreetly at the chamber entrance. Dr. Wren, we believe you're suffering from a stress-induced delusional disorder. These personnel will escort you to the medical facility where you can receive treatment. As the medical team approached, Elise backed away, her eyes wild. You think I'm crazy? That I imagined an entire first contact scenario. She reached in her pocket and pulled out a small data drive. Then explained this. It contains the original sensor readings from Alpha 1, the pattern analysis, everything. A security officer took the drive and inserted it into a reader. The main screen displayed its contents. Nothing but corrupted data, unreadable fragments that resembled system errors rather than meaningful information. Dr. Wren, Rivera said gently, please go with the medical team. We want to help you. Elise allowed herself to be led from the chamber, her mind racing. How is this possible? An entire fleet, an event that had brought humanity to the brink of interstellar contact or conflict, simply erased from history and memory. Yet she remembered everything. The ships, the signal, the neural map she had nearly decoded before they vanished. She remembered the terror and wonder that had gripped the world, the dreams that had united human consciousness in shared vision. In the days that followed, as doctors diagnosed her with an elaborate delusional disorder, Elise began to understand. The fleet hadn't come to invade or to communicate in any conventional sense. They had come to observe how human consciousness processed their presence, and then they had withdrawn, taking the memory of the encounter with them. Except they had left one witness, one mind untouched by the forgetting. Why her? Perhaps it had been her work on the signal pattern, her recognition of its true nature as a map of consciousness. Perhaps it had been random chance, a glitch in whatever process had wiped the event from humanity's collective memory. Or perhaps it had been deliberate, a control subject in a vast experiment, left to observe how humanity would respond to a single person's insistence on a truth that contradicted all available evidence. Released from the medical facility, but stripped of her position and credibility, Elise retreated to a small cottage on the shores of Lake Geneva. There, she continued her work, mapping the fragments of the alien pattern that remained in her memory, searching for meaning in an encounter that, officially, had never happened. Visitors were rare, but occasionally Sora would come, bringing supplies and news from the world that had moved on without Elise. During one such visit, as they sat watching the sunset over the lake, Sora asked the question that had clearly been troubling her. What if they're right, Elise? What if it never happened? Elise smiled sadly. Then I'm the most elaborate madwoman in history, with a delusion so detailed it includes the exact configuration of ships that don't exist and a mathematical pattern that maps consciousness itself. But why would they erase themselves from our memory? Sora pressed. If they were advanced enough to reach Earth, why not simply communicate? Perhaps direct communication wasn't their purpose, Elise replied, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the lake in gold and crimson. Maybe they were testing something more fundamental, our capacity to recognize truth when it contradicts consensus reality. Or maybe, she paused, a thought forming that she had never fully articulated before. Maybe they weren't erasing themselves from our memory, she said slowly. Maybe they were testing how deeply memory defines us as a species. If we could forget something so monumentally important, what else might we have forgotten throughout our history? What other visitors or insights or truths have we experienced and then lost? Sora didn't answer, her expression troubled. Elise knew her old friend still believed she was suffering from delusions, still hoped that one day Elise would recover and rejoin society. After Sora left, Elise walked down to the water's edge and looked up at the emerging stars. Somewhere out there, the fleet continued its journey, carrying with it the accumulated data of humanity's reaction to their presence, and, perhaps more importantly, humanity's reaction to their absence. One day they might return, or others like them might arrive, conducting different tests, mapping different aspects of human consciousness. And when that day came, would anyone remember that it had happened before? Elise closed her eyes and felt the pattern that still lingered in her mind. The lattice of consciousness that connected all thinking beings across the cosmos. It was still there, still evolving in her thoughts, a reminder that some truths transcended memory and record. In her small notebook, she wrote words that would one day be found and puzzled over after her death. They didn't come to invade. They came to test the memory of humanity. And perhaps, in leaving one witness, they left also a seed of truth that will grow when they return. For they will return, not in my lifetime perhaps, but someday. And when they do, someone may remember that this has happened before, not from history books or records, but from that deeper memory that connects all consciousness across time and space. One memory is enough. One witness is all it takes to preserve the truth. Years passed. Dr. Elise Wren's claims about an alien fleet that surrounded Earth only to vanish without a trace became a footnote in psychological textbooks, an example of a brilliant mind fallen prey to elaborate delusion. Her cottage by Lake Geneva became something of a pilgrimage site for fringe theorists and conspiracy enthusiasts who believed her story. They would come to sit where she had sat, looking up at the stars, and wondering if she had indeed been the sole witness to humanity's first contact with an alien intelligence. Most of the scientific community dismissed her work, but a small group of researchers continued to study the fragmented patterns she had left behind, mathematical structures that seemed to model consciousness itself in ways that defied conventional understanding. Among them was Sora Lin, now Dr. Lin, who had never fully rejected Elise's claims despite her inability to remember the events described. Something about the elegance of the patterns, their internal consistency, suggested a truth beyond what could be verified by conventional evidence. On the 10th anniversary of Elise's death, Sora visited the cottage, now preserved as a small museum dedicated to the woman once considered one of Earth's most promising astrophysicists. As she stood by the large window overlooking the lake, a peculiar sensation washed over her, a momentary shift in perception, as if a veil had briefly lifted from her mind. For just an instant, she remembered the alien fleet encircling Earth, the pulse of energy that had swept through Alpha, one station, the dreams that had united humanity in shared vision. She remembered working alongside Elise to decode the alien signal, the frantic council meetings, the moment when every weapon on Earth had simultaneously deactivated. The memory lasted only seconds before slipping away, leaving behind a profound sense of loss and a single, crystal-clear thought. What if Elise had been right all along? That night, as Sora slept in the cottage's small guest room, she dreamed of standing on an endless plain under an alien sky, filled with geometric shapes. In the distance, a tower of light rose into the heavens, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to resonate with her very being. And somewhere in that pulsing light, she felt a presence, vast, ancient, and patiently waiting, not for humanity to reach the stars, but for humanity to remember that the stars had already reached them. When she awoke, the dream faded, but a question remained, echoing Elise's final journal entry. They didn't come to invade. They came to test the memory of humanity. Perhaps the test was still ongoing. Perhaps it would never end. Or perhaps, as Elise had believed, one memory was enough. One witness to preserve the truth until the day when they returned and humanity would have a second chance to understand. As dawn broke over Lake Geneva, Sora opened Elise's old notebook and began to write, adding her fleeting memory to the record. One more fragment of truth, preserved against the tide of forgetting. Somewhere in the vastness of space, the alien fleet continued its journey. Silent, watching, remembering, and perhaps, in their incomprehensible way, waiting to see if humanity would remember them when they returned. For they would return, and this time, someone would remember that it had happened before.